excited to be here with you all today talking about innovation and driving change within one's organization. I'm going to introduce our panelists and invite them all up to the stage. We've got Tony Heldreth with Owens Corning, Derek Leathers with Werner, and Sean Graves with JB Hunt. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're talking about innovation and change, specifically how to drive innovative initiatives and strategies within your organization. Each of these gentlemen have driven and are currently driving innovative initiatives within their own companies. So I thought we'd start with just setting the stage. What were the aha moments, the pain points, or the opportunities that you identified that originally prompted you or triggered you to go pursue an innovative strategy relative to what you were doing or relative to the status quo at the time?
Sure. Let me start.
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so Tony Heldreth again with Owens Corning. I'd say I've been there about 3.5 years, and what I saw when I got to Owens Corning leading the supply chain was a lot of inefficiency around our interactions with customers, and then how we interacted with our carriers on the logistics side, a lot of duplicative work. So we'd take hundreds of thousands of orders, manually enter hundreds of thousands of orders, and also then in a very unautomated fashion how we were connecting with our carriers. So we started on a couple of paths. One of them was around, sounded pretty simple to us, but it was a big change for us, was how do we automate our tendering to reach out to our carrier base and try to drive some simplicity and simplification there. And then probably more interesting was around optical character recognition. Roughly 50% of our orders come in via email and fax, and we have dozens of people that are just rekeying that into our enterprise system. So we've been on a journey for the last couple years around how do we scrape that, put it into SAP, and then it's sort of an approval process that allows the orders to go in that gets us confirmations back to our customers in 1/10 of the time that it took before, and has allowed us to have some of our customer service reps being more proactive in reaching out and proactively talking to our customers.
Hi, I'm Derek Leathers with Werner Enterprises. From my perspective, I guess, starting with the kind of big picture, 5 to 7 years ago, we woke up in a world where we started, thinking about and realizing that if absence of change, living in a one-way truckload environment as your kind of way you're going to pay the bills didn't look very promising. Looking forward over the next 10 years, we knew with ongoing advancements in automation and with kind of the Uber-like effects that we had seen across the taxi industry, that staying in sort of the most commoditized end of the transportation sector wasn't going to be very viable. But to the previous speaker's point, we weren't lucky enough to be the mosquito, if you will, so we couldn't sit in a think tank and think about how to be disruptive because we were a publicly traded company that had revenue targets and earning targets to meet while having to figure out how to reinvent ourselves. So from a big picture perspective, what we did is really kind of laid out a 5 to 10 year plan that said what is the most difficult to do, what is the most least likely to be disrupted, what is the stuff that would take the advantages of being big and well capitalized and well funded to be able to pursue, and embarked on this journey to kind of transform ourselves from a one-way truckload carrier into a logistics and supply chain company. Heavy investments in IT, heavy investments in the ability to do things and capitalize large-term projects that small startups maybe wouldn't be able to. At the same time, migrating our trucks. The beauty of trucks is they have wheels, you can move them. And so we move them to harder to do, dedicated, store delivery, multi-stop, very integrated operations with our customers, and away from sort of long haul, one-way commoditized trucking, knowing that was going to be the first battlefield to defend. And in 5 short years, we've been able to grow in both our top line and bottom line revenue earnings, but also kind of reinvent ourselves. And so over that time frame, we went from a company that was 65% kind of one-way truckload, most highly vulnerable to all sorts of disruption, to today Dedicated is the largest portion of our fleet. Our logistics business is $500 million of revenue and growing. We're continuing to expand our tool set and be able to fund, programming and projects that would be somewhat more difficult to replicate in a startup mode, and yet kept our roots true, which is still this sort of 3,000, once was 7,500 trucks in one-way truckload, and now is reduced to 3,000 trucks, doing mostly team expedited and mostly hard to do 99% or better type on-time service business, and less of the you call we haul business that we think is going to be increasingly displaced through automation and other technical tools.
Just to follow up on what Derek said, I'm Sean Graves with JB Hunt. Similar at JB Hunt, we have 4 different business units, 4 different business segments. We have those segments for multiple reasons, growth being one, and then just the cyclical nature of the market. So if intermodal is down, can brokerage be up? Dedicated's had tremendous growth, and we've gotten into things. We weren't doing home delivery 8 years ago. Now we're doing home delivery because customers pushed us in that direction. We're doing agri services, so actual live haul. So if you want to talk about final mile, that is truly final mile for that segment. But customers really pushed us that direction. But I would say that just innovation is part of our culture. Just a little bit of a history lesson. We were founded by a gentleman that had an 8th grade education from Stuttgart, Arkansas, that saw rice hulls being, as they would harvest rice hulls would be left there in Stuttgart. And he had the idea to take the rice hulls and haul those to Northwest Arkansas to use as chicken bedding in chicken houses. So he did that and then created, obviously, a very large trucking company. And then in the 80s and 90s, again, he saw an opportunity to disrupt himself and disrupt our organization and got into intermodal. And he did that by reducing his truckload company and creating the largest intermodal company that is in the market today domestically. So that's a big deal. We talk about that all the time and things that we're doing now. So like when we talk about our marketplace application where we're trying to disrupt brokerage, we go back to what we did in intermodal. We took freight that was over the road and we put it on the train because it was the right thing to do for the customer, and ultimately it worked out for us.
That's great. So a couple of themes, if I may, extract from what you all said. Bringing in a pair of fresh eyes from the outside to look at your process and identify opportunities that stand out, trying to isolate those most manual, inefficient processes in the org, listening to your customers, taking direction from them, and ensuring that you have an innovative culture at the root of everything that you're doing. And then I think looking at some of the adjacent markets like consumer transportation and trying to anticipate when they'll come hit you, all stand out from what you guys said. Now, you kind of can identify the opportunity there, or the problem. There's obviously a lot of technology buzz out there. Some of it is easy to put in practice. Some of it is certainly not. How did you guys think about what you could actually accomplish versus, what was perhaps not mature enough or sophisticated enough from a technology perspective to use?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think what we've tried to do at Owens Corning is think aspirationally around what would we think would be the best place to get to, and then if we end up a little bit short of there, so be it. We've still moved along quite a bit. In terms of what we're doing with optical character recognition, we would love to have 100% of our non-EDI orders go through that process. The reality is the way we interact with customers, there's several thousand customers. It's unlikely that we'll ever get there, but we sort of shoot high, and then if we end up getting 80% of the way there, we're still a lot better off than we are. The other piece that I would say is our connection with our IT department. So we have sort of dedicated group of people that focus on all the things that we're doing in supply chain that are partnering, so they're also helping understand what's going on in the marketplace and bringing those options to us, so then we can sort of have the business side thoughts with the IT side thoughts. We work in concert to try to drive that and understand what's possible and push as hard as we can.
Yeah, the interdepartmental connectivity was a big takeaway from last year's session on a similar topic.
Yeah, so I guess landing the plane a little bit from our perspective, a couple of thoughts. One, the places where we've had the most success in the building has been where we've really integrated IT as part of the business versus having the traditional approach where we had an IT department that was being called upon to build resources or programs or new thoughts that the business thought they wanted or felt they needed, but without IT being more integrated into the day-to-day, and I mean physically, literally integrated, sitting in and being a part of the group, they often were building tools that were rear-facing. And so what I think companies, at least our company, fell victim to at times before we learned from it was you take your best operators or your best at whatever process you may be trying to improve and ask them for input on how to build systems. And what they would tend to do is be the best because they were really, really good at deploying a kind of rigid operational approach based in efficiencies, but rear-facing, not thinking about how it could be done better, or we could skip an entire sort of level of learning and go to something much more efficient. So on the capacity side, for instance, some of our best brokers and best carrier folks, really were using approaches that were 10 years dated, but they were extremely good at it and they could do it more efficiently than anybody else, but it wasn't scalable, it wasn't trainable, teachable, it wasn't something that you were going to win with as a long-term strategy. So using those folks for their input wasn't always their best approach. Once we integrated resources inside the group and had them watch and listen and learn and see how freight moved, they were able to come up with more innovative approaches in conjunction with input from the business. And so we've developed a capacity lead generation tool as an example that has taken 11 steps out of what was the traditional approach to procuring a carrier on a load and really eliminated those through machine learning and big data and our ability to kind of take historical trends and patterns amongst our carriers, match it against service capabilities and historical performance, and have a cost included in the analysis and do what used to take 10 to 12 minutes for a person to identify who they were going to start pursuing and reduce that down to 15 seconds. And so now visually displayed, force ranked, based on characteristics with performance and financials included, that person has a starting point that's just light years ahead of where they were. The first generation of that, we saw improvements of 15 to 17% in productivity, which to me was disappointing based on what I just said, going from 15 minutes to 15 seconds. But it was because you had all the skeptical digestion of what was now presented to you, and people forcing themselves to go back to old habits and somewhat or trying to see through the data because they knew better. And it's taken a long time now to get the next generation of acceptance up. And as we've added to that tool and made it more scorecardable or more the ability to kind of be more metric driven and shown and visually displayed to offices how offices using the tool are outpacing them and growing exponentially compared to them, then just good old-fashioned competition takes over. Because the one thing in this industry, in this meaning the supply chain industry, when I say that, is it's full of very competitive people. And so if you can turn their competitive juices on and let them know who's winning and who's not, they tend to want to make that scoreboard look different. And so capacity lead generation has been a big success for us. We think there's a long way to go with it. And to your question about why did we do it now versus sooner, I think frankly, had we done it at least in our organization, when you're starting up as a brokerage operation and you're 100 million and you're 150 million and you're not that big and you're really kind of getting your feet underneath you and you're out there trying to recruit and bring on board talent, I don't think that would have been the right time for us to be simultaneously automating big parts of those very jobs that we were trying to go out and recruit for. But as we got that talent seated and embedded and started to make real progress to become a relevant top tier kind of brokerage player in the country, then it was a job improvement versus job displacement kind of message that was being sent. And they like the fact that they're able to do more productive things and obviously make more money because the more loads they cover and the more margin they have, the more they make. So it's kind of a win-win. And now they fully embrace it. But still more to come. The computer technology obviously is caught up to what the vision was too. The ability to crunch all that data and display that result quickly. Because if you're sitting around waiting long periods of time for this information to become available, you're going to give up on it pretty quickly. And so this immediate display, immediate feedback was a critical part of its success.
I would say for us, we have literally hundreds of innovation projects, and they really boil down to a couple things. That they're either trying to fix an existing process to make us more efficient, and there's metrics behind that, whether it's loads covered per person per day, et cetera. But that's a huge push for us. And then the other projects are really around data. We have data titles that we haven't had in my 20 years. Data analyst. There's like PhDs that do nothing except look at data. And we have a lot of data, and we've had a lot of data for many years, and we haven't done anything with it. But to Derek's point, it's to the point where we're now taking that data and trying to, determine trends and things that can help us be more efficient. And that's really the thing when we talk about really innovation at all, is like, what can we do to be more efficient across the board? And for us, like we've been working with Project 44 for the last month and a half, and this weekend we're installing documents on the LTL piece, and this is just one example. But we believe that can take a person and a half out of our staff, and it's that's a small deal, but that's one thing. But for us as a growing organization, that person's not going to lose their job. We're going to take them and reallocate them to something else that creates more revenue and more opportunity, and then automate this back-end process of literally going out to LTL carriers and getting documents and putting them in our system.
Yeah, that's great, and that makes a lot of sense. And one thing I love about what all three of you are saying is that innovation doesn't mean you have to go shoot for the moon and turn everything upside down on its head. It's actually a very gradual process, and success can mean something different in step 1 versus step 2 versus step 3. And part of that is driven by the compounding benefits of generating more data through the change that you're pursuing. So I guess that's a great thing, because it means you can kind of start on an innovative initiative very easily. But it's also challenging because it makes success very ambiguous, right? So I guess maybe isolating one of the initiatives that you guys have pursued, how did you think about defining success when you started? How did you think about defining success as you progressed, both in terms of the key metrics that you were using and some of these other things like getting buy-in from key constituents or change management?
I'll start just on that one example. And again, we have titles that I haven't had in 20 years, but we have black belts. So the black belt group went through that project before we even started, identified where we were today and where we were going to be, and then over the next 2 weeks, she'll measure that. So it'll be a very, strict. We'll be able to tell like what where we were before, where we are now, and was the project successful. And that's really the mentality we took. I mean, we've got a lot of people. We've increased a lot of IT staff. I joke. They're kind of like gremlins. You add water and they just multiply. But it's something that we need, and it's. We were talking earlier about just being aligned with our IT staff. Our IT lead is here. One thing we talk about all the time is my group and my boss. We're very transparent, like operations transparent. You guys can probably get that. And they are not as transparent. And it's not that they're holding back. It's just different cultures, and we're working through that as we speak. But we'll get there. They'll either become one of us, or we'll beat them into submission. So.
Yeah, I would say for us, in terms of the measurement part, we've tried to keep the customer in front of what we're doing. So our big sort of top level measurement is on-time delivery to promise. So doing what we said we would do, being mostly in the building material space. That's sort of the requirement we've gotten from our customers. And then just how does optical scanning support that? We measure where are we at the top level measurement, but then also how do these different pieces of change and innovation that we're driving support that? So we start there. And then, I think like Sean talked about, we've, just sort of week after week measuring our capability. How are we doing? If we're doing great, wonderful, why? How do we do more of that? And if we're not doing very well, which some of these projects we haven't done very well when we started them. Okay, so what do we need to do differently to ultimately drive that outcome?
Hey, Eric, I've got a question real quick just for you guys. Talk about change management. I mean, you mentioned it previously. Just to add on to what you're asking, Erica, change management, it's hard. It's but you're all in organizations that have long histories, great histories, but now it's change. And I talked to each of you or several of you about this at different times. Address how you think about that and how you're addressing change with the organization.
Yeah, I would simply, we try to keep it simple. We try to keep the message simple about why it is we're trying to drive something different. We're not just doing it to be different. I mean, we've wrapped the two pieces I've talked about are around how is this changing our customers' experience. You know, the recent, work that we've started with you guys here at Project 44 is all around furthering the ability to let our customers know where their products are in whatever manner they want to. So we try to keep it simple, clear, and very repetitive in terms of driving change.
Well, first off, Tommy, part of my agreement to come was that I didn't have to answer any questions from you. So you're violating that agreement right now. So yeah, our organization, so we're similar to Hunt in our history. Our company was founded by a man with basically a ninth grade education with one truck who saw an opportunity, who started trading in grains and realizing by taking those grains all the way down to South Texas and then bringing watermelons north, he could quickly make money, and actually started the business as the physical trader of the goods, not as a trucker, meaning he bought the goods and resold them and made more money on that than trucking. But over time realized trucking had some attributes that were smoother cash flows and more even operation, and started to add trucks. I tell you that story because from those humble beginnings, you then grow up and become a company that still, although publicly traded, has our founder very much involved. He's chairman of the board, and has a long history in core long-haul trucking at a time when I am asking or directing the organization, I would say, that we have to become more portfolio diverse, and we have to change, and we have to be a player in this growing logistics field, and we have to be relevant, and we have to use more automation, and we have to be a relevant player in intermodal and brokerage and et cetera. And that's not easy to do, because on one hand you have this vast wealth of experience and knowledge, and this man that founded the company who knows it inside and out better than anybody walking the earth ever could, and yet we have to ask for change. And so he's open to it. And I'm fortunate that I live in a world where he is. But I literally flew in. I just walked in the door right before the panel because I was with him yesterday in Colorado at his ranch. And he'll be 82 in May, in perfect health, by the way. But he's talking about automated vehicles and brokerage and logistics companies and all this stuff that, as he said, is very frustrating to him on some level, because it's so much change in a lifetime for one man to absorb. And yet he ends every one of those sentences with, and that's why we have to be a player, and that's why we've got to be relevant, and that's why you got to keep doing what you're doing. And then usually ends with, and that's why I'm glad it's not my job anymore, Derek, so good luck. But how you do it is, I think you got to let people know the why. I think the most important thing, so when we went down this strategy, and I see David in the room, and I know some of the Wall Street folks thought it was almost cheesy when we laid it out, but we used to talk about our company in the form of a pyramid, because the base of the pyramid, the biggest part of our business, was one-way truckload. We had this stable middle called dedicated, and this little tip of the pyramid called logistics. And we rolled out company-wide to the drivers, everybody inclusive. I'm a big believer in what I call the one-voice strategy, meaning you cannot speak to investors one way, drivers another, and customers a third, because you will get caught. And so when in doubt, honesty is the best policy. So we publish every single investor call we do. We publish everything we speak at, and we let our drivers have accessibility to it. But anyway, so we had this pyramid strategy, and we said we had to square off the pyramid. And it was this visual representation that we scorecarded all the time, all around the building, as we grew logistics and made it a bigger, better part of our business. At the same time, what it also reminded people is that the base, the foundation, the roots of our business were always going to be trucking, because that's who we are at our core, is a trucking company with tremendously enhanced capabilities. And we wanted everyone not to be fearful of this change. They've embraced it. And now the question is beginning to be asked for the first time, as you've now have logistics as a third of the business and growing, what's that shape look like 5 years from now? And that's the new challenge, is to address the reality that our logistics business is going to outpace, from a growth perspective, what we're able to do in dedicated or one way, with, especially in today's driver market. That dedicated is getting to a point where it's so much larger than one way. It's it's arguably not tenable long term to continue to grow dedicated at the same rate because you need one-way assets to back that fleet up. And so whether customers like it or not, all the automation that's coming and these bells and whistles and this sexy stuff that we and others bring to the table still ultimately doesn't move freight. Trucks and trailers and drivers do. And we can't lose sight of that. And we have to make sure that we find a way to make trucks and trailers and drivers reinvestable, just like we make systems reinvestable all day long. Because in systems, you have this scalable model that says, once I build it and people want it, I get ongoing returns or ongoing, coupons clipped every day for no additional work. And in trucks and trailers and drivers, you get paid for every mile of additional work, and there's no scalability to that. A mile tomorrow will be the same as a mile today, and we still have to physically move it. So it's a balance of pushing the envelope on what people are comfortable with while reminding them of how we got here, emphasizing the importance of the foundational roots that make all this new stuff possible, and not really always. It's not a democracy. I mean, sometimes you got to will it to happen. We joke in our building all the time. We do have a democracy. We just vote by the pound, so I win, and then we move forward.
I like that. I think one of the things you're hearing consistently is be crystal clear about your high-level goal and the commercial impact of that goal to everybody. But then you can boil it, you can kind of break it down on a micro level, both in terms of timeline, week or bi-weekly measurements of success, but also individual role. What is your role in helping us achieve this overall goal? And in having these frequent checkpoints, you can assess if you're actually changing or sliding or going sideways or whatever it may be. But I do like the point of that you made, Tony, of kind of reflecting on what happened over the last 2 weeks and what went well, what didn't go well. It's an important part of this. So I guess as you guys reflect back on the last year, a couple of years, what are some of the things that really surprised you or that you think you guys could have done better?
I mean, really for me, back to the last question. So we have, and we've said this publicly, but we're in the middle of spending about $500 million on a lot of things, technology related. But one of those things is we're migrating our current system to a new platform. When our senior engineer, our senior VP of engineering, kind of rolled this out, she showed kind of like the product life cycle. So it kind of goes, and then there's a bottom, and then you come up. Well, that bottom's called the Valley of Despair, and I call it the void. And sometimes it's dark down there when you're going through these projects. But for us, it's really like I make this analogy, and this is the best analogy I can give. It's like driving down the road at 65 miles an hour and then deciding you need to change the tire because it's flat without stopping, because we have to grow. We're doing all of these new things across business segments. And we have to add new technology to grow with customers. We also have to change our old technology. So the balance of, what do I fix now? What do I develop now that I may potentially throw away as this new system comes online? But we're in the middle of that right now, and it's going to be another 1.5 years before we're fully into our new system. So it's a challenge. And I would say for us, as far as change management, looking back, as leaders, and I'm bad about this, I got to get out of the valley. I can't be in the valley. They have, people say that, calm is contagious. If I'm in the valley, then my team's in the valley, and, everyone's in despair, which is not good for anybody. It's not good for us, and it's not good for IT. Back to the transparency, that we have and are working on with IT. It's a two-way street. They're over there not doing anything wrong on purpose, but as you're in the middle of it, and you're just trying to tender, 2,000 LTL loads, and the system may not be working that morning, you got to fight through it, and you got to figure out how to get it done.
I would say, if I look back on it, I would say we should have probably been bolder and moved faster, but resourced it better as well. Because I think about the two big initiatives that I've talked about. One of them we resourced very well, moved with intelligent speed, and got to really good outcomes. The other one, which was the optical character recognition, I probably underestimated the technology associated with that, and then the way we resource it. So if I were to step back, that'd be the way I think about it.
Yeah.
So, bit of a journey here, but I'll try to be quick. For us, when I think about like looking back, what would you do differently or what were you proud that we did? So back before there was a tight driver market. So if you think back in 9, 10, 11, it was a rough market out there. There was plenty of drivers. There was not enough freight. Capacity was loose. Carrier margins were compressed. And yet we were staring down the barrel of all this data that said to us, we are right around the corner from the biggest driver shortage in the history of transportation. We were telling our shippers about it with not much success, but we believed it in our heart. So one day we was sitting in our offices and we said, look, if we believe this so much, what are we doing about it? So in advance of this shortage, what are we going to do differently and fundamentally change our organization in advance of it? And what was great about this is simultaneously we started trying to understand what's the single biggest success factor in a trucking company's financials. So I'm back on the truck side of our business now. And what we found was more than any other single metric, driver tenure was the most indicative of financial success, more than any other single metric. So not rate per mile, not production, not this other stuff, but if you had drivers tenured in your fleet, not tenured in general, so 10 years experience somewhere else meant very little in terms of their profitability compared to 10 years experience at Werner. And so if that's the case, you've got to focus your efforts and redeploy your assets to increase tenure within your fleet, even at a time when it wasn't popular to do. So what did we do? We went out and acquired the largest school training network in America. And Werner now graduates more new drivers into the industry than anybody in the United States. We did that at a time when capacity was relatively loose and the investment was hard to justify, but we believed the data that we were looking at and the importance of this, of having a vertical supply chain, if you will, of future drivers. Simultaneously to that, we said, okay, what's affecting drivers' happiness and turnover? And what you found increasingly was this idea that they felt tethered to their load, tethered to their truck, and just always under constant scrutiny or oversight. And they became drivers for exactly the opposite reason. They became drivers because they wanted to be the masters of the universe and independent and out over the road, and that's the kind of pioneering spirit they have. So 2 big initiatives were launched. Buy the largest school network in America, vertically integrate the curriculum, make sure that we train drivers for the job they're going to actually perform versus training them to just graduate and have a license, because that's 2 different types of curriculum. And then marry it with data in their palm and give them a driver app that makes their life easier and more successful, gives them visibility to their paychecks, Werner News, any presentations I give, makes them feel tied to what we're doing and why we're doing it, and then continue to improve upon that app. The ultimate goal was to stabilize turnover in our fleet at a time when drivers we thought would get tight. But the actual outcome was in the second quarter of this year, we had a 20-year low in driver turnover at a time that the driver market has never been tighter. And so that combined with having a fresh supply of vertically integrated students coming out of schools, we think is just a better model. And so I could go out and acquire trucking companies. And to me, that's like you can give somebody food once or give them the fish once, or you can teach them how to fish. If I acquire a trucking company, I get 300 drivers one time. If I go out and develop a school network that produces high quality students, not just for us, but for the industry. Our schools are driver choice schools, and we believe in that philosophically to our core. So they can go to that school and go drive for any company in America. They are not forced under contract or any kind of agreement whatsoever to come to Werner. But we garner obviously a very high percentage of those drivers because they like what they see as they go through that schooling. But many other carriers hire those drivers as well. But having that success metric in place, having our eye on the ball, which was driver tenure driving financial results, makes things like driver appreciation, driver culture, all of the rest very, very easy because people then see the why. Because the why is ultimately in their pocketbook as well. Taking care of those drivers and treating them better than they've ever been treated before impacts their personal pocketbook. So they'll do it for the right reasons. They'll do it because they're good people. But you can tie it to their pocketbook and their own welfare, and people will embrace it even quicker.
Yeah, that's a great story or anecdote, and it drives home the importance of a evidence-based decision, relying on your data, relying on your institutional knowledge rather than the current market environment or whatever is kind of in the news or in the media buzz to make a decision. And when you have that evidence, be bold and swift with that decision, even if it might not be intuitive at the time. So I think that covers a lot of the questions that we had for ourselves today. I don't know if we have time to take one or two from the audience, but perhaps we can turn it over to you guys.
other than barns.
Do you distinguish between continuous improvement and innovation? I sort of look at it as innovation is one step above and disruption would be above that. But in your various initiatives, individual initiatives, would you distinguish between the two?
I would say we do sort of informally. I mean, we don't have a different path for, okay, this effort, we're going to focus on innovation versus continuous improvement. They merge with each other. I do think about them personally differently, but not specifically within the supply chain at OC.
So I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I guess we technically have. But one of the things I did at our organization was we set up an innovation council, because what I found in our building all the time was, truckers are interesting breeds, and I consider myself a trucker, so I'm not being negative when I say that. But in our business right now, you have things like electric vehicles coming down the pipe, autonomous vehicles, various alternative fuels. And those folks that expressed interest and were wanting to research or put time against it were often scoffed at unnecessarily within the walls. And so by formalizing an innovation council and charging a group of people to do nothing but, they do their day job, but then in addition to their day job, focus on innovation and alternative technologies and things that we need to be aware of, they were charged to do that and therefore embraced and supported and given the support when they needed additional resources around the building. I have found that to be very successful. And that is different from, obviously, all kinds of groups every day that are very metric driven on continuous improvement and, driving, deadhead down, maintenance costs down, accident frequency down, all of that type of stuff. The Innovation Council is looking more 5 to 10 years out. Those folks are looking quarter to quarter to try to kind of eke out small incremental improvements. The rest of the building is.
We started, I think it was 3 years ago, we started this project called Elevation. We brought this consulting group come in, and did a bunch of work across business units. So like I was taken out of my daily job and I worked on intermodal for 6 months from top to bottom. And after that was over, we have a process now where any employee, driver, shop personnel, admin can submit ideas. And those ideas can be innovative, but I'll give you an example. Like there was a shop in Texas where they were replacing mud flaps. So if a mud flap came off a truck on the road and they got like a Love's mud flap on it, when that trailer or truck hit the shop, they would replace the mud flap to make sure they matched, because they just thought they should match. So that someone came up with the idea about, hey, let's stop throwing away these Love's mud flaps, and hey, if you want them to match, let's just put another Love's on the other side, if that's indeed the plan. But it just led us to other conversation about why are we doing that and how did this process start. We're a large company. One person in Tyler, Texas thought they were doing the right thing, but it adds up. That cost adds up. So that's just one example of kind of the continuous improvement. But it could be that someone has an idea that leads into technology and innovation. We do a deal. It's a kind of hackathon where we take all of our IT folks and allow them to come in with ideas. And some of the stuff that these kids come up with, it's amazing. I mean, literally amazing. There was one that where a kid was doing a dimensioner where you could drop a quarter on a table, and then from the sound of the quarter, he could somehow dimension this table. So we do that once or twice a year along with our elevation projects.
Sean, I think you just answered about half of my question, but I'll ask it anyway. Because, Derek, you mentioned the rear-looking issue earlier on. People understanding how to do the job they've always done really well in an operational sense, but how difficult that is then to look forward and see how that job and that process might change entirely as you try and innovate. What do you need to do? I think this is true for every organization. What do you need to do to kind of overcome that problem and shift the vision from looking back at how we have always done things and why that's been great to why we need the change and what might we do in the future?
Well, so one thing I think we do very poorly as business, and we work on this at Werner all the time, and we try to do a better job of it, is if you want people to be less afraid of change, then take the time to celebrate the changes that are successful. And we don't do that. I mean, so companies go out and they make whether it's an iterative change or a truly innovative change, and it has success. You don't take the time to celebrate that success and get people excited about the idea that change is good. You don't celebrate personal successes and career advancements from people. So we do a thing called the Compass series at Werner as an example, where people who have moved, laterally or had kind of haphazard career paths because of change or disruption that took place in the area that they worked, but ultimately ended up with a much more rewarding career. We have these lunch and learn sessions where once a month they go in and they present about their history of their career and how they got there and what they did and the peaks and valleys of their career, so that young people coming up can better visualize what a career looks like in a business that's changing as fast as ours. So I think just communicating, celebrating change, giving people ownership of the change that's happening around them and letting them know it's coming is good, is a positive way. The other one is being unabashed about the need for it. And so we talk in our building, maybe we're, in these times of everybody gets a ribbon, maybe this isn't as popular, but winners and losers all the time. And I talk about aligning with winners and distancing ourselves from losers. And that means shippers, that means carrier partners, that means technology providers, that means constantly evaluating on this winner-loser kind of approach, who's winning and who's gaining share, who's making a difference and disrupting and who's not. And if somebody's on the decline and not taking appropriate steps to make changes, again, trucks have wheels. Our trucks will migrate to other shippers because they should. And because we need to work with people that are thinking 5 to 10 years out, because if we don't, their freight volumes will decrease over time because their model doesn't make sense. And so if you're constantly talking about the importance of change, constantly talking about you either innovate or die, people start to realize that it's important to them to be innovative as well. You were talking about apps and things that are developed by this hackathon approach. I think that's a brilliant thing. One of our most interesting stories of this past 12 months was a driver for us that was a programmer. I mean, he had long programming history, didn't want to do it anymore. He was out driving, and he innovated a new app on our Drive Werner app that our drivers have in the palm of their hand that has fundamentally changed the way they deal with bill of ladings. Now, we had to massage it and improve it and make some additions to it to make it fully functional. But as we're out celebrating Driver Appreciation Week this week and next week, we ask the drivers how they feel about this app, they go crazy. Then we ask them, did you know it was created by a driver? And they go, obviously, even more nuts. And so celebrating change, celebrating successes is a critical part of people accepting that the status quo is not going to work long term.
Yeah, Derek, similar to that, I love the education side, the transparency side. Have you tried to push to the drivers and communicate some of these technologies they're using to make their job better? Maybe that's things they don't see that optimize things in the back end from a big data perspective?
Yeah, so again, with our handheld app that we have for our drivers, it started out with obviously a driver focus group and a lot of sort of low hanging fruit, right? Giving them payroll, giving them trip miles, giving them trip information so they didn't have to leave the truck stop in the dead of winter to go check their onboard computer to see if they had a load, giving them just real sort of blocking and tackling information. But from that, it's become a extremely robust tool. And so we have, roughly 10,000 drivers in our fleet, a little shy of 10,000. And the average driver, originally after 6 months, we had 6,000 to 7,000 of them using it at least once a week. Now we've got essentially all of them. There's a few that are going to be holdouts probably till the day they retire, but call it 98% penetration using it 6 to 7 times a day. Call volumes to payroll department is down, permits is down. Across the board, the white noise is just down in the network because they have the information available to them. And then to your question specifically, one of the most important links that we just had underestimated was this sort of Werner News feature. So one of the icons on their app is Werner News, and they can click on it. And every single day, there's updates on what's going on at Werner, what's going on in the transportation industry, like, kind of where's Waldo, like where am I at in the United States? They can track that and see, and what am I doing? So they know that we're not all just sitting in some ivory tower, not out there trying to work and make Werner better. I challenge our fleet every day. I was at driver meetings all last week across America as part of our pre-appreciation week. And I tell them, listen, your job is to be the best driver in America. And no offense to JB Hunt, who's a quality company, Swift, all these guys, quality companies. But when you put the keys in the ignition, you have to be better than they are. That's your job. My job is to be better than their CEO. So let's both do our jobs collectively and not get caught in this, can you back as well as I can back? Because can you go out and give a speech as well as I can give? Let's play our positions and do it to the best of our abilities. They embrace that, and we get along great. But I think just keeping them informed, one vision or one voice, I talked about that earlier, that's critical. It was unbelievable in our organization when we launched that strategy, how often we caught ourselves saying something slightly different internally to what we were saying externally, or slightly different to customers versus what we might say to an investor. And now that is dealt with an iron fist. Whatever our messaging is our messaging. And that means somebody, one of those three, internal associates, external investors, or external customers, one of those three is going to like it less than the other two more often than not, but you got to be consistent with your messaging.
Just real quick, I would say, and we do the exact same thing, but one thing we do is we have the drivers rate the shippers. So as they do that delivery, they give them ratings. And that's something that we in turn give back to our customers and their scorecards. And it's things like, is there a bathroom available? All of those amenities that drivers are looking for, those are something that we cover with customers in these quarterly reviews. Because as capacity gets tight, and if you're not driver friendly, drivers aren't going to want to go into your facilities or take your freight.
Sure.
So just to add to that, because I think more and more carriers are doing this, and I think people need to be aware that data is way more available to us than ever before, real time, of what's happening at ship locations and consignees across America. We just had a customer forum in the summer where we had about $1.5 billion of our revenue represented under one roof. And we were able to talk about an innovative project. One of the IT people figured out how to take all those ratings and all that driver data and display it in terms of a heat map live on screen while our entire customer base was in the room. I had no idea the emotional response that was going to gain, because the next 4 hours of my life were spent with customers worried about the red spot around Atlanta and whether or not that red spot was their exact location or the guy down the street. And so that heat map display, and we can pull that up whenever we want, is live based on driver feedback, really sends a message as to who, back to winners and losers, who's winning on this driver of or shipper of choice thing and who's losing, and then what are your plans to get better? Because I do think, in fairness, you have to be patient with a shipper who has a committed roadmap to improve. You can't just walk away because rates are higher down the street today because they're delaying your driver. But if they don't have a concrete plan to improve with actionable, strategies, it's time for the truck to go elsewhere.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
I love hearing that you have drivers' ability to rate shippers. Have either of you? I don't know if you guys, Werner has it too, but have either of you considered sharing that data with the public, and then maybe there would be some centralized Yelp for shippers or rating or something like that for the industry to use, so that the shippers or receivers who are, the pain in the butts will actually be then motivated. Hey, we're the lowest on the list. Perhaps we should think about, caring about, drivers' time and giving them parking and use of facilities. Is that a consideration anywhere that you guys know of?
It hasn't been on our roadmap just because of data and just how data is right now. But I think it's a great idea, and I think it's something that we need to get to. But to Derek's point, just having the heat map and not calling people out, that's going to show you areas of concern, and you can obviously go into that specific area with that customer and say, hey, you're not the problem in Atlanta, but there's other problems in Atlanta, and that potentially could affect capacity. Anytime that their capacity gets very tight, there's shippers out there and not throwing stones, but if you have penalties on, if you're 15 minutes late, those that all gets back into the rate, and that all gets back into, drivers don't want to. Most drivers don't want to fail, right? Most people when they do their job, they want to be successful, and these guys that are that are out there doing this for a living, they don't want to be 15 minutes late. And then if you say you're 15 minutes late, I'm going to charge you $350, and there's things that's outside of their control, that's just that's not right in my mind.
Yeah, so similar answer. We've actually have thought about it and had some debate about it, but here's the concern. So let's say we weren't a, $2.5 billion publicly traded company that's got to hit these top and bottom line numbers, and instead we wanted to be a startup, a mosquito. I think there's a subscription model out there for this data that we have availability to that could garner me X amount of money and at the same time cost me 3x that because I'd be giving up tribal knowledge that allows me to price better than other people in the marketplace. I think if you look across the marketplace today, there's probably a handful, the Hunts, the Werners, and a few others that can do what we're doing today with this level of data and this level of finite detail. Our ability to utilize that for our core business, which is to put our trucks in the right location at the right time at the right price, is far more valuable than some subscription model that I get paid, per widget every time somebody accesses it. Recently, we've had a couple people approach us that said, hey, why don't the 5 or 6 of you, and the email I got just 2 weeks ago included, reach out to Hunt, reach out to these guys, why don't you aggregate this data and make it available? I think you'd also immediately run into, from our perspective when we talked about it, antitrust issues and all kinds of other issues that would make it difficult to do. So it's not that we don't necessarily want to share, it's that as long as the data is only in the hands currently of 4 or 5 players, if those players got together and started sharing and collaborating with that data, I think we'd have a whole host of issues coming at us that we would not want to have to deal with.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, and it underscores that kind of timeline, figuring out what you can do today versus what you might be able to do in the future. Tony, Derek, Sean, thank you so much. This has been excellent, and we appreciate you sharing your insights.
Thank you.